met with for me a really, really wonderful and marvelous spirit named Maria de Padilla, which is a Pombashira. Kimbanda is the cult of Eshu, and Eshu and Pombashira. Pombashira is the female aspect of Eshu. All of them answer to a kind of archetype, which is an archetype of the Pombashira, which is extremely sensual being, a woman which is beyond good, evil and good, which is beyond rules. But it is for this that many people understand the Pombashira as you can do whatever you want.
Hello and welcome to the Spirit Box podcast, where we explore folklore, magic and the world of the spirits and everything in between. Today we're joined by Veronica Rivas, who is an Uruguayan author and researcher based in Brazil. Her cosmological and anthropological studies in magical practice among Eastern cultures led her to become interested in healing techniques. When she became a Reiki Master, she started to research the possibilities of integrating Reiki techniques with other forms of energy work, using her academic training of philosophy as an epistemological background. Veronica is also initiated practitioner of Vajrayana Buddhism, focusing her practical work on the deity known as Kurukula. Currently, her research is focused on the female deities and spirits of the Vajrayana and Hindu traditions, and Maria de Padilla and her connection with Quimbanda. In the Plus show, we discuss what the spirit guidance in Veronica's work looks like and how spirit communication manifests in her practice and what her experiences have been in working with Kurukula and Maria de Padilla. As per usual, my pronunciation is appalling. Now, if you're a regular listener to the show, you've probably noticed it's been quite some time since I've released the show, and that's because there's been some logistic issues with the podcast. Now, there's something that I'm working through, but I'm looking at this as an opportunity to recalibrate the frequency of the show, and it's something that I'll be talking about on Patreon, the Patreon, a little bit more in more detail as things unfold. Now, speaking of Patreon, I'd like to thank my ANC supporters: Icaro, William O, Robert W, Roland B, Steph, Tim, Tao, Wei, Pamela, Michelle, Marilee, Marco, Jen, Hannah, Flora, Eric, Desiree, Alston, Ali, Carrie S, Brennan, Tyler, Madeline, Jorge and Tony. Thank you, each and every one of you, for your support. Now, if you'd like to support the show, then give me a 5-star rating. It all helps shift the magical algorithm in my favor. Right, let's get on with the show. Veronica Rivas, you're very, very welcome to the Spirit Box.
Thank you very much. For me, it's really, really a pleasure to be talking in this afternoon for me, in the evening for you, I think.
yeah, it is. I think I'm a few hours ahead. So to help get our listeners to orientate them and get them kind of understanding kind of where your area is, could you tell us a little bit about your area of expertise and some of your work? That'd be fantastic.
Yes, I started studying philosophy. I am a philosophy teacher. I used to work at the high school in my country. I am Uruguayan, but I live in Brazil. Now I am in Brazil in Bahia in a rainy day. And initially my interest was in yoga and Eastern philosophies. And because I started to practice yoga, and it is through yoga that I started to study and to practice other kind of esoteric techniques, Indian or Buddhist. And some years later, because I became very, very involved with Buddhism, specifically with Tantric Buddhism, about the Vajrayana Buddhism, I I decided to initiate me into the preliminaries named Gondro. It was still in my country, in Uruguay, more or less in 2008. And but because of my philosophical and anthropological interest, I got involved with the Afro-Brazilian cult known as Kimbanda. And I can say that it was through an entity or a spirit that I became very, very involved during my experience in Kimbanda. It is why I decided to start to walk into Buddhism doctrine and other kind of Eastern magical techniques. And during the time I belonged to a terreiro, which is it is where the Kimbanda practitioners reunited to perform their contuations and to study and to go through initiations, etc. I met with for me a really, really wonderful and marvelous spirit named Maria de Padilla, which is a Pombashira. Kimbanda is the cult of Eshu, and Eshu and Pombashira. Pombashira is the female aspect of Eshu. And since then, Maria Padilla became my guide, my mentor. It is a spirit that I felt a profound and a deep love. And during my contact, my practices with her, I discovered that I needed to know and to practice Buddhism and to go deeper into yoga and other Eastern traditions. So I belonged to that terreiro for more or less 3 years, but then I abandoned it. But I never stopped practicing with the entities I met there, with my Eshu and my Pombashira, because I believe in an eclectic way of practicing, of walking your spiritual path. There are a lot of people that ask me why, if you are a Buddhist, because everything you write now, it is with a Buddhist content. It is about Hinduism, and I am so fond of Buddhist meditation and practices. But for me, they are not different. They are the same name, the same things with different names. And we are talking exactly of the same things. So I try to integrate them. And because of this, more or less in 2015, I published a book, my first book. I co-authored it with my husband, with Umberto Masci. It was a book about Maria de Padilla. It was published by Haden Press. And in this book, I developed a comparison between the Pombashiras as spiritual entities, as archetypes, in comparison with the Eastern spirits called Dakinis. And this was initially my first step in this, but from this year to now, I had developed a deep study about this, but I know that there is a lot of things to study more. It is really, really, it is a difficult topic. but it is wonderful. It is challenging. And you are always wanting to read, to know more. You discover that it is not enough to study on books or to just be initiated. You need to practice. It is a really, really practical path. And it was really, when I unite in my practice with my studies, that I can perceive new things and new ways of interacting with other spirits, or discovering how can the meaning this kind, or what kind of things these kind of spirits can, in which way they can guide us, or they can give us a path, or maybe a better understanding about our magical reality, our magical being.
The spirit contact is really, in I guess, the point of this podcast, because one of the things I'm really interested in is people's different experiences. Some that just seem to happen randomly to the individual, or other ones that people pursue. They actively go out to become initiated and start the process of making spirit contact. And I've never heard of Kimbanda before, so I'm really interested in your experiences there. And looking through, because I've been obviously doing my internet stalking research about you and your work, and I was looking through some of your work about, like, Maria Padilla. Am I pronouncing that correct?
Padilla,
yeah,
Queen of the Souls.
Yeah, and is that the entity you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah. Then could you tell me a little bit more about how it started, and I guess about the entity in your relationship with her?
Well, I met Maria Santo. Maria Santo is a kind of priestess of the Kimbanda tradition. Because I was interested in this kind of Afro-Brazilian thought or Afro-Brazilian beliefs. I had mainly an anthropological interest. So I decided to go and to talk with her, and she invited me to one of their cults. So I decided to go, and I remember that I was thinking that I was going to take a lot of notes, but nothing of that happened. I remember that I entered the room. I saw this kind of darkness with red light, and I became very, very impressed. I had never seen something like that before. And in this kind of cult, they have what they call incorporation. I don't know if it is. So this spirit incorporated into the priestess of the terreiro, and she started to talk with me. And I don't know, but it is very, very difficult to explain what I felt, because I felt like it was a complete state of ecstasy. Or maybe if I was in front of somebody that I had met before, or I already know very, very well. And later on, I discovered that she was my chief spirit. Maria de Padilla was my chief spirit. So, without thinking too much, I decided to ask for initiations, to belong of the terreiro, to be a part of the terreiro, and I started to incorporate the entity, because in Kimbanda the cultivation is mainly to develop your mediumship, to incorporate your entities to work. and also to make offerings and other kind of ritualistic stuff. And for me, it was a new beginning for everything, because I started to see things in a very different way, to understand things in a very different way, and different kind of experiences started to happen to me, and for me it was like if I because when I was a child, I used to see some. I used to have some magical or spiritual experiences, but I didn't understand what does it mean. But in this, from this point, I started to really. I started my way to understand all things that happened to me in the past, and for many reasons, I cannot. I couldn't stay in the terreno, especially because I had a different way of interpreting the doctrines or the spirits, because generally a lot of people among the Kimbanderos, they only see in Eshu or in Pobashira a kind of spirit to material things, an extremely sexualized spirit. But in my case, I felt another thing. I felt that Eshu and Pumbashira are sources of wisdom. If you can reach this kind of manifestation, maybe. And it depends of the practitioners. As in all kinds of paths. Because even in a Buddhist path, your experiences depends on your development, or maybe on your abilities, or on your discipline, or patience, etc. But Maria de Padilla, it is considered the chief spirit, Maria de Padilla of the souls. It is considered the chief spirit, female spirits of Kimbanda, the Kimbanda tradition. And her story is really, really very interesting. I have another book that when I talk about my experience with Maria de Padilla, published with Beneficia Publishing by Diane Arroway. And in this book, I talk about my experience with her, how I met her, and I try to explain how much she means to me. I always feel very emotional when I am talking about her, and but she was a Castilian queen. She was a historical character. She was a Castilian queen. She was the lover or husband or wife of Don Pedro I. And she was a noble woman, but because of the feelings that she awakened in the king, she was started to be related with witchcraft even when she was alive. And especially also because of her fondness with Jewish people. Remember that in this time in the medieval Spain, especially the nobles wanted to expel the Jewish from Castile. And it is said there is a little funny story where that the king, Don Pedro, had to marry it with, because it was a political agreement, he had before, since they had this political agreement before he turned into a king, and he had to marry Blanche of Bourbon. But in this, Don Rodrigo of Valencia, a bishop, one century after Maria de Padilla's death, tells that when Don Pedro was about during the first day of marriage with Blanche, he received a present, a kind of belt full of precious stones, and it says that when he wore it, the precious stones turned into snakes. And from this day, Don Pedro abhorred Blanche for the rest of his life. And it is said, Don Rodrigo says that it was Maria de Padilla that sent this hex belt to him. But there is no real proof about this. But for people, started to create a kind of a myth of Maria de Padilla, who uses all kinds of resources, especially witchcraft, to retain the love of the king and to do whatever she wanted and to favor her family, etc. And during the Inquisition, many women accused of witchcraft by the Holy Inquisition of Spain and also of Lisbon, of Portugal. They said that they invoked Maria de Padilla in kind of a spells, especially love spells, in which Maria de Padilla appears as a very, very important and powerful spirit in hell. But this happened more or less 1 century after her death. But we know and we can imagine that during her life, people used to think that she was a kind of a witch, or she was because it was said that she was a very beautiful woman, a very intelligent, but for them, beauty and intelligence were not enough to maintain the king in this way, a kind of this, especially this kind of man, that the king was a very, it was a very difficult kind of person. But he was extremely, extremely in love of Maria de Padilla. And because of these witches, it was especially in Portugal. Some of when they were declared that they were, I don't know how to explain it, but one of the many witches started to be exiled to Brazil, especially from Portugal, because as a kind of punishment for being witches, or to be declared as false, that they were false. And it is said that a witch, a woman who arrived here in in Brazil, was caught again practicing witchcraft, and she declared here the use of a spell in which she named, or she called for Maria de Padilla. And probably this is the beginning, this is the source why many centuries later she is going to be a very important part of the Kimbanda cult. But the Kimbanda cult is not a very ancient. It's not ancient. It is more or less at the end of the 19th century when the Kimbanda that we know today. Of course, it has its roots in earlier times.
Thank you for taking me through that story. I'll have to I'll have to get your book and have a read about Maria Padilla. It sounds a remarkable woman.
It was a project of Diane about the it was a series. There is another book, and I decided that if you want, is it going to be a series about the feminine? I have it here. So about the divine dark feminine series, Maria de Padilla had to be there. So I decided to tell about a little bit about my story since I met her. And it has another things like a little bit of history about who was Maria de Padilla. And, it is something about Kimbanda, Pontos Riscados, and some small, a little bit about my practice with Kimbanda, but something very general, in the practical way, something very general, something that can be practiced for any person without any problems or confusions.
Cool. Okay, so looking at things from a different direction, because there's two pieces that I want to talk to you about as well, as well as kind of Maria Padilla, but the Dakini spirits that you I don't know if you work with them directly, but you've been researching them as well, as they're female spirits, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Could you tell us what Dakinis are and kind of how you came about them?
Well, generally, in this cult, firstly, we need to know that there is no one Kimbanda. There is a lot of ways of practicing Kimbanda, but there is certain things that are common, and it is why you can say that you are a Kimbandero. For example, it is especially the presence of the work with Eshu and Pombashira. Eshu is the active, can be considered the active principle, and Pombashira is passive, if you want to divide it in this way. For me, they are different manifestations of knowledge, of wisdom, of energies. But the source, if the energy of Eshu as a whole, as an energy which is always in movement, which is creation itself, we say it is extremely active, and in Kimbanda they say that without Eshu you cannot do nothing. So, for example, you need to differentiate. When we go to study the different manifestations of Kimbanda, we can say that, for example, we can find that the chief male spirit is called Mayoral. So we can ask, who is the Mayoral? And it is a lot of things, because for some people, Mayoral is the god Sambi. It is a manifestation of Sambi. For other people, Mayoral is San Michael, for example. For other people, Mayoral is a trilogy, Beelzebub, Lucifer, and Astaroth. And I imagine that for other people, Mayoral must be other kind of a spirit. But the thing is that exists a spirit or a group of spirits that answers as a mayoral, as chiefs, and a group of spirits that it is compounds, female spirit that compounds the archetype of the Pombashira. And then you have different Pombashiras, which is not very easy to explain how we can we have so many Pombashiras, because we have in Kimbanda is Kimbanda as we know now, it is divided into kingdoms. For example, you have the kingdom of cemeteries, the kingdom of the souls, the kingdom of the beach, the kingdom of the forest, and so on. And you have different spirits belonging to different kingdoms, females and male. But for example, you have the Pombashira, Queen of the Seven Crossroads, Pombashira Rosa Caveira, Pombashira Gypsy or Pombashira Cigana. But all of them answer to a kind of archetype, which is an archetype of the Pombashira, which is extremely sensual being, a woman which is beyond what it is good, evil and good, which is beyond rules. But it is for this that many people understand the Pombashira as you can do whatever you want. And every single time they go to, especially women, they go to the street and they use provocative clothes or can have lots of men interested in them. They said, it is my Pombashira because I have a strong Pombashira. I am not against this, but I think this is a very poor understanding of what really means a Pombashira, because a Pombashira is this, but she is lots of more. So a Pombashira is during when you belong to a terreiro, when you develop your cult of Eshu. You need to work with your male Eshu and with your female Eshu or Pombashira, and you need to develop this work at the same time. You cannot work only with one of them, because they are. You need that balance. But there is a lot and many ways of working in Kimbanda. I think that maybe we can think that there are so many Kimbandas as so many Kimbanderos.
That's so intriguing, and that I've got lots of kind of thoughts popping up in my head about your description of that sensual goddess beyond good and evil, and having kind of, as you already put beautifully, that is everything, has everything, all expressions. I
would like to, if you allow me.
Please go ahead.
I would like to, because when I am researching, I am writing a book about Maria de Padilla, more with more historical more historical things and facts and another kind of work about her with a psychological and a symbolical understanding of Maria de Padilla in the Kimbanda courts and in her meaning for as a Pombashira and her meaning for a practitioner. So I came to a book written by a Brazilian author named Cassandra Rios. This book, it was called Maria de Padilla, but it was a kind of novel, a sensual novel. But she described the story of a young woman who, in certain moment, she encountered Maria de Padilla, and it is a very, very, very interesting story. But the thing is that through the words of this character, that I do not remember the name, I read one of the most beautiful description of Abombashira, which really, really meant a lot to me. And I included in this book I published with Beneficia. So it is said, it said like something like this. I would never see a more beautiful, more sensual, attractive, and light woman. Such an impressive figure that just smiling had the power to paralyze me, to leave anyone enchanted by her beauty. Then I noticed she was not my Anga. Anga it was a kind of spirit guide that she had. She was another woman. My Anga was beatific, and this other was one satanic, diabolical, impressively sensual. I got scared. She smiled and reassured me. Do not be alarmed by my sensuality. I am not a Europari. It is a kind of a spirit too. I am pure sensuality, pure desire, with all the heat that I can radiate from sex and lust. I am not obscene or depraved. I am nature. And nature is always in agreement with itself. For me, it was really, really special, this description, because when you research about what people think or what people feel when they found themselves in front of a Bombashira, you found words like, I was scared, she was extremely sensual, I cannot stop watching her, all kind of, it was a very, very strong feelings. And exactly these all feelings are described here in this book of Cassandra Rios, that I decided to include it in this as an example and to people enjoy the definition and to understand better what it is. I think that it's very difficult to explain what is a Bombashira. You need to feel what is a Bombashira. And this happened with most Afro-Brazilian beliefs. You need to feel it in your skin. It is really, really difficult to describe the experience you can have when you are in front of a kind of this spirit, and Bombashira even more. But lots of people feel scared or feel in a extreme delight. Myself, I feel as I was in something that expressed everything in a very complete way that I couldn't explain to myself. And the thing is that I was a philosophy student, that I needed to find a logical explanation for everything. But since I found that maybe sometimes you do not have a logical explanation for everything. And it is not because of this that these things that did not make sense for you or for other people. And it is this exact description that fits perfectly with name in the Eastern tradition named Dakinis. And for example, I talk a little bit about Dakinis in my Kurukulla's book, but I am thinking about making a deeper study, just focus on Dakinis and Pumbashiras. But I need to especially to be better on Sanskrit. I started to study Sanskrit to make to come be able to read by my own in the sources without some mistaken or some other interpretations of the terms. Because we know that sometimes if you are a Buddhist, you want to interpret a term in the light of Buddhism, because many times you want to fit it in this way, and sometimes it's difficult because you do not have the real aspect of a term. For example, especially with this kind of terms like Dakinis, for example, they are very, very difficult to find, to understand, or you have a lot of translations and a lot of meanings for the same word.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's a big issue with translations like that, right? It happens all the time. There's loads of stuff like in Ireland where I'm from, like the everything was translated from, like, even our place names was translated from Irish, from Gaelic into English, and so many of them are just they have no resemblance to what it means in Irish, like nothing. They're not the same at all. That happens in nearly every kind of, every time you have that requirement of from one language into another, it always happens. And in terms of, so the description, are you saying like from these spirits, the Dakinis, they're very sensual, they can impart knowledge, but they also can be quite frightening depending on the experience that somebody has. Let me think about my question properly here. When those Dakinis come into contact with human beings, from a traditional, say, Indian or Nepalese context, where does that happen? Does it happen in nature? So I was reading about spirits with a very similar name called Yakshinis, like with a Y, but they're very similar to, say, what you would say are jinn or fairies in terms of their behavior, but they also can be seen as being very, very beautiful women, but they're associated with trees, specifically with trees.
Yes.
As fairies seem to be in Europe. What are the other descriptors of the Dakinis? I'm trying to pronounce this correctly so I don't confuse things.
Yakshini, especially since a Buddhist point of view, from a Buddhist point of view, they were especially they had the role of protectors. For example, as guardians of treasures of the minds. Most of the time, termas, which is treasures of the minds, kind of instruction that guide the practitioner to enlightenment. This is a terma, and you can find in the Hindu tradition also the Yakshinis as a guardians of special places like lakes, caves, trees, ancient trees, and they are generally portrayed as voluptuous women with wide hips and in sensual positions. But the Dakinis are a little bit different, because many times, for example, you can say that Kurukula can manifest herself as a Yakshini, as a Shidam. Shidam is the chosen deity. It is that deity that it is the deity that is guiding you to all your process until your enlightenment. And but Dakinis had another role, and Dakinis represent wisdom, represent knowledge in a high level. And the origin of the term Dakini, it's related to a temple that now I am not remember the name of the temple. It's a little bit complicated. In India, there was a temple dedicated to the Matrikas. The Matrikas was this kind of this group of goddesses of terrific, frightful goddess, which the chief of them was Chamunda. Which was that skeletal goddess that is commonly found in cemeteries or charnel grounds. And it is said that in this temple there were an inscription where the word Dakini appear in relation with this group of goddesses. So if they are in relation with this group of goddesses, of course, they have the attributes of this goddess. This goddess were people used to worship them because they frightened them. They were afraid of them. They worshipped them to placate them, to avoid the wrath of especially the wrath of Chamunda. But there is another text in which the word Dakini appears in relation with goddesses like Kali and Durga, and they appear as warriors, as in battlegrounds when they were fighting. The goddesses were fighting against the kind of demonic spirits. And in this special context, the Dakinis appears as blood drinkers and flesh eaters, as beings really, really horrific and with a very frightful aspect and manifestation. But when the term was amalgamated with Buddhism, the term Dakini had a small, passed through a process of evolution or of changing, a process of changing, and the Dakinis started to be this kind of being that are the source of knowledge for a practitioner. So, for example, the father of the Tibetan Buddhism, of the Vajrayana Buddhism, who was Padmasambhava, the great magician and yogi, known as Padmasambhava or Pema June or Guru Rinpoche, for all his initiation, the most important initiations that he took was through the contact of the Dakini. So in the Vajrayana tradition or Esoteric Buddhism, we say that it is said that without the contact with the Dakini, you cannot attain or cannot reach nothing. So all your practices are to try to dispel the obstacles of your mind, to try to see and understand and to establish direct contact with a Dakini. So Dakini means the method, the techniques, the way. It is the active manifestation of wisdom.
That's remarkable. Thank you for taking me through that. That's really incredible. I had no idea that's what the Dakini represented to the individual in terms of their own pursuit of enlightenment. That's you're blowing my mind here. I think that's incredible. So you mentioned Kurukula, as you took us through the description of the Dakini and the context. Can you talk, because obviously your book is entitled Kurukula, the Goddess of Bewitchment. Can I ask you to take us through what she represents and the areas you explore in your book?
In my book about Kurukula, initially my book I thought of the book as a devotional offering. So the first thing that I started to write was the prayers, and the first thing was exactly one prayer, and was a prayer that I dedicated to Kurukula during the full moon. And during my practice, the other prayers started to emerge, and they started to compound the practice. And it is a practice, a basic practice, and that anyone can perform without problems, and maybe can be the beginning of lots of things, or maybe initiation with Kurukula. It depends on the practitioner, and depends of the people. But for me, it was important when I started to work with Kurukula, to understand her. So I decided to include in the book as historical research part of symbology, because, for example, during meditation, especially in Vajrayana meditations, you need to develop your visualization, and in tantric art, which is, for example, as the images that appear in the book, every single detail is not randomly. It is with a very specific purpose, to the practitioner, to the mind of the practitioner, and to generate a kind of background for your practice. And for example, so I thought that maybe people needed to understand every symbol and why they were visualizing, for example, the ankusa, or the bow and the arrow, or why in this case Kurukula is seated, or etc. Because we can find different manifestation of Kurukula, in which many of them she is in a dancing position, and the dancing position is alluding more to her aspect as a Dakini, because they are Dakinis that they are generally portrayed as in dancing and sensual dancing positions. But the Kurukula that appear in this book, she is seated, and I explain here why she is doing the mudra she is doing with her hands, etc. So in this book we can find a history background. I try to cover because the Buddhist side and also the Hindu side, which is very, very difficult, because I felt during my research that the Buddhist environment was eclipsed the Hindu one. And for example, many people told me, "Oh, you are talking about. Do you really have right to talk about Kurukula, which is a Buddhist goddess, etc., etc." There were many Buddhists that were a little upset with me because I was talking about Kurukula, but I am talking about Kurukula since a historical and anthropological point of view. And my practice is my personal practice, which can be I share with people who would like to do it. But we need to understand that Kurukula was not initially a Buddhist goddess. She was incorporated, she was amalgamated to the Buddhist pantheon, but she was a tribal goddess. She was a goddess that probably her origin was in the lands where today are maybe India, Nepal, more or less these places. And she was worshipped by nomadic people. And she was especially related to fertility, to the land, to harvest, and there are a lot of Dakinis, which is a kind of spells, ritualistic text also, that in which Kurukula appeared as a subjugating deity. For example, people needed to subjugate a husband, a boss, etc., use Kurukula, even to go against the government. And there are many ritualistic texts of Kurukula related with health, especially women's health. And because she was considered a very powerful deity to work in this kind of issues, and where especially to women to defend or to be that could be threatened by by men, etc. And Kurukula had there are ritualistic texts when it was mentioned that she was a powerful deity in this kind of issues. And another important thing about her, it is that she was a ferocious goddess, and for example, in the most of the texts that I consulted, it is very, very difficult to find her with a male counterpart. For example, there is a text that, and for example, iconography, until now I have never seen a statue or a painting of Kurukula with a male counterpart or united with her consort, like happened with other kind of deities. There is a text, a ritualistic text, that mentions her as a consort. I think that of the god Kamadeva. I explained this in the book, correct? So there are so many names of gods, and but I had never seen her portrayed in this way. So I can say that maybe she is a goddess more like Chamunda, for example, that Chamunda was a goddess that in her origins, mainly in the main history of her origin, she emanated from Devi herself, from the essence of the goddess itself. So Kurukula is essentially feminine in this aspect, and in this, I think that maybe she emerges in a similar way, but it is just a theory, because there is no certainty about the origins, the real origins of Kurukula. But we can say that it took a time that to her to be amalgamated to Buddhism. But she was in Buddhism. She is more related with magnetizing, with the magnetizing aspect of wisdom or of prajna. Because, for example, in Tantric Buddhism, we talk about prajna or prajna. In Tantric, in Tantra, in the Hindu Tantra, is more, we find more the expression of Shakti, which is a little bit, they're more or less the same, but there are some differences, especially some practical differences. But she is I think that it is what mainly most of the goddesses that are today are a part of the Buddhist or the Vajrayana pantheon. They were Hindu, from the Hindu one, or maybe from the Bompo one. So I think it is wrong to talk about appropriation. And I think that I am not doing an appropriation of Kurukula because I wrote and I developed a practice about her.
In terms of your work, and in terms of if anybody is interested on, I mean, obviously reading more, obviously your books are available on Anathema, but where else can they find out more about you and your work?
I have my Facebook page as a writer, but I am not the very social media person.
Good for you. Good for you.
I am not. It is difficult for me.
Yeah.
It is difficult for me even to promote my work. And sometimes I ask to Kurukula, okay, you do things so beautiful for me. How can I make those things available for other people? And then I start to promote or to write some articles about her. I have many articles in many different books. In Anathema, I have two, and in the last one, the last one of Pillars, there is an article about Dakinis.
Yeah.
And I have a blog, but it is in Portuguese because there are many things of my publication are generally in English. And in Portuguese, I found that information about many things, for example, like Tantra, there are a lot of misinformation, a lot of wrong views, that I started a blog to write about this kind of teachings or philosophy, or the philosophy of Tantra in a more historical, in a serious way.
Right.
Because sometimes there are people who is searching for information and found such kind of banalization that being Tantra, and I am very involved with Tantra because I am a Tantric initiated, because I am a Vajrayana initiated, and because of Kurukula is completely a Tantric deity. But we need to understand Tantra. So it is not easy. It's not easy to understand Tantra. It's lots of studies, lots of sources to consider. But there are very few sources, good sources available in Portuguese.
Right.
And there is many people here in Brazil that they cannot read in English or Spanish. Spanish is better that in this kind of publication, but there are people here that they do not read even Spanish, just Portuguese.
Right.
So I had a blog called Melong Yeshe. Melong Yeshe was my initiated name that I received from my Lama, and from the Lama who initiated me. And it is melogyeshe.com. The articles are in Portuguese. I think that sometimes have the translation, but I think the Google translation is not very good for websites.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put the links in the show notes when people are listening. If you're listening to this now, check out the show notes. You can click on the links and find out more about Veronica's work. Veronica, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for taking me through your work. It's been really, really interesting. And there's a couple of things that I'm really interested in what you said that have rung a couple of bells for me. So I'll have to follow up with you. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you so much for considering my work. Sorry for my mistake. I'm not very accustomed to be speaking in English, and I was a little bit nervous.
You've done brilliantly.
And sometimes you try to think in the better way of expressing certain things in the clearer way. But it was really, really an honor, a pleasure. Thank you very much from my soul. And I hope that people like and started to interest in Kurukula. They are in Dakinis, or maybe the interest or a new beginning in whatever path. And to whatever thing is good to develop your spirituality. Just what vibrates. Just choose what vibrate with you, and do not think on boundaries.
Well, thank you again. Thank you very much, Veronica. I really enjoyed that. I was really illuminating some startling similarities between some of the tenets in Thelema with Vajrayana Buddhism. Really interesting stuff. So if you'd like to find out more about Veronica's work, then do check the links in the show notes. And I'll leave it there. Nice to be back. Talk to you soon. Bye.